Hi, this is Bethany with Morgan James Publishing, and today I'm speaking with our author, Nancy Poland. And Nancy is the author of Dancing with Louie, a father-daughter dance before and after Lewy body dementia came to live with us. Well, hi, Nancy. How are you today?
Good, thank you. How are you?
I'm great. I'm so excited to be talking with you about your new book and what a powerful topic and story that you have and you share in your book, Dancing with Louie. So I'd love to ask you some questions about the book and about your journey to share with people today. So could you first talk to us about how and why you decided to write this book, Dancing with Louie?
Yes, well, my father had Lewy body dementia, and it was quite a journey for our family. And I just felt compelled, even while he was still ill and after he died, that I had to share this story with people. I had to give some meaning to the suffering that he went through. So I actually waited 6 years, and during that 6 years, I made notes and I made a couple outlines, and I kept thinking I have to start writing. I finally decided to write a blog because it felt like it would be easier to do it in little pieces. So I started writing the blog, and I got into it, and I had a conference. I live in Minnesota, and I had a conference in Florida. So I went 3 days early, and I sat in an Airbnb, and I just wrote, and it just like poured out of me. And it got very emotional where I talked about where my mom died and then how my dad went into a nursing home, and it was almost cathartic in a way. And I wanted to use my dad's original poetry in it, so I kind of interspersed that throughout the blog. Well, once I got the blog done, some of my friends and people that read it said, this is really good. This is a great story. So I decided it was time to turn it into a book. So I'm not sure I would recommend turning a blog into a book. It's a little tricky because, a blog is kind of more chatty and a book has to be tighter. And, I had to cut a lot out. But, I finally got the manuscript done and I sent it to Morgan James Publishing. And to my surprise, they accepted it. So that's kind of the how of how it started.
Wow. Um, and what would you say? I know you mentioned like some of your father's poetry. What would you say the driving force of writing it? Because this is a topic that I don't think many people talk about, and there may not be a lot of resources. So. And then you also mentioned that it was also a bit cathartic, perhaps,
Yeah.
to do that. So yeah, what would you say the why was?
So I really have three whys. My dad he was born before World War II. He became an entrepreneur when he was just a kid. They sold newspapers and actually lefse, which is Norwegian bread. The kids did, and they just helped with the farm. And he was a World War II veteran. And when he got out, he and my mom got married, and they started a family. And when I was about 5 years old, he started his own business. So he was in business for himself all the rest of his life. And he was just, he loved to tell stories and jokes and very personable. Um, and then, he got this dementia. And first they said he had vascular dementia. Then just months before he died, they said it was Lewy body disease. Now that I know more about Lewy body dementia, I can see the signs, but we didn't know much about it then. He died in 2012, and even then it wasn't very well known. And, it was just a shock to our family. When he died, he was actually what they called a functional quadriplegic. He was stuck in a wheelchair. It wasn't that his muscles couldn't move, his brain couldn't connect with him. So he couldn't obviously move himself. He couldn't toilet himself. He couldn't even lift a piece of bread up to his mouth to feed himself. And it was just such a shock to our family to have, our strong dad become this person we didn't hardly even know. So I really thought, my first reason that was to give a message to caregivers that, caregivers, you're not alone. There's all sorts of resources you can find to help you. Right like in the middle of my dad having dementia, my mom got kidney cancer. And so, that required more care on her part too. So, I found various community resources like Meals on Wheels for them. My mom and I went to a support group for a while for family members with dementia. The Alzheimer's Association was great. I mean, I talked to them a couple times. And the Veterans Association was also just so helpful. We took him there and he got medications and they did various checkups and kind of the mental checks. Um, and eventually we needed a driving assessment and they did that. And at one point when they had moved, they didn't have any money and we had to pay the rent, the disabled American veterans actually lent them some money. So, I mean, I just can't speak high enough about the VA and how they helped us. And even they helped us with a pension for them too. But, these things don't just appear. You gotta find them. So, that's kind of my message that, you can go out and seek these things. I also, I wanted people to understand how important it is to get a diagnosis. Just find out what's wrong with your loved one, and seek the medical care. And you have to be an advocate. The medical system, as good as they are, they're rather disjointed. And, we have this clinic and that clinic. And now with COVID, it's even more complicated. So you have to be there for your loved one. The second part of the book is called Helpful Tips for Caregivers. And so there's everything from financial to legal to driving, self-care kind of hints. So the next reason, really what kind of drove me to write this was the whole father-daughter dynamics. There were times when my dad and I didn't always get along. I like to say when I was an adolescent, I said he was the alien dad, which is kind of typical adolescence. Obviously he didn't change, but I did. But even as he was older, he just did some things that made me really uncomfortable. I was raised in a Christian home. My parents are Christians, but some of my dad's business dealings just really bothered me. And we struggled with our relationship. And, so I just want to say to people, everything is not perfect in lovey-dovey in families. And you might not get along with a parent or a sibling at all, but, we still have some moral obligation to care for our loved ones. And, as he got in his 60s and 70s, his behavior just became more kind of strange. And, looking back, I'm sure the Lewy body was attacking his brain. And, the more I research it, I see people in their 50s and 60s with Lewy body dementia. Mm. And, so I think some of his behavior was that, but, I was very judgmental and I just thought, why is he being this way? He's supposed to be a Christian. He's supposed to be my dad, and all these things are happening. And, I really had to learn to come to terms that my parents, they weren't perfect. No parent is perfect. And they did their best with what they had. I mean, that generation didn't have, antidepressants, and certainly the men didn't go to group therapy and things. So, they really did their best. And, it's very much of a faith story. It's, how God sustained us. I mean, my dad not saved 1 cent for retirement, and so they had very little money. And I was just like, God, how, I was the administrative daughter. I did their finance. And like, what are they going to live on? And I just, I felt like God was saying, I'll provide for them. And that didn't stop me from seeking out resources. It didn't stop me from trying to be good, prudent fiscal manager. But, God really did provide, like through the aid in attendance veterans pension he got. And then they sold their house right before the market dove, back for 2008. It's like, that was kind of a miracle. So, it was a faith story. So, I mean, that was kind of it. It was both for others. And like I said, it was kind of cathartic for me too, to work through that relationship.
Oh, absolutely. I imagine so. And you say so many interesting things there that I feel like a lot of people can relate to, whether this is the thing that they're helping somebody navigate with caregiving or it's something else. But the caregiving journey alone is a tremendous topic to tackle in a book, not to mention such a specific experience like this one. So could you talk about any challenges that you faced writing this memoir?
Well, the first challenge was very personal. When my mother died, I grieved and I became very depressed. And I kind of struggle off now with depression through my life, but I could manage it. But I would just cry at the drop of a hat. And I eventually ended up going on antidepressants, excuse me. But is that the kind of thing you want the whole world to know? If you want people at work to know that? So it's like, do I really incorporate this story? But it's just so important for people to understand how to take care of their mental health and how to seek medical care or therapy or something when they're struggling. So I included that. I think, um, writing a memoir is very challenging in and of itself. First of all, do you use real names? Do I use my real name? Do I use my dad's real name? I mean, because this was about him, and probably some of it isn't totally complimentary to him, and it certainly isn't to myself. Do I use my three sisters' real names? How much do I talk about my sisters who are alive? And I love my sisters, and we're very close. So how do I deal with all that? So I ended up using my dad's real name, mostly because of the poetry. I felt like almost like he was a co-author, because there's a good amount of poetry in the book, and um, it's so the essence of him. So I did use his real name. I just called my sisters 1, 2, 3. I respect their privacy. I didn't want to talk about their secret things, which I didn't anyway, believe me. I didn't want to disrespect my parents. I didn't want to make them sound like, horrible people. And I see some people who write memoirs like, it's a tell-all. I'm going to tell everybody my family secrets. It's like, that's not necessary. So it was just such a balance of how do I tell enough to portray a relationship, to portray I struggled with my dad. I mean, there were times I just didn't even want to take care of him anymore. I mean, after my mother died, I'm just like, I am exhausted. You sisters go take care of him. And at that time, he was pretty well into dementia. But so how do you portray that? And I wrote and I rewrote it a lot, and I bounced it off my sisters who were my sounding board. It was just, it finally came together, and still wonder, did I tell too much? Is somebody gonna get angry? But I think it's important, again, to get the message out and to portray myself and portray how I dealt with my dad, and just so people can understand that, yeah, family dynamics cannot be perfect. They never are perfect. But again, love has to conquer all. And like, again, there's some moral and spiritual obligation. Another point, it's not just the Christian faith. The Muslims say that, and the Hindus, a lot of faiths say, you need to take care of your parents, and you need to take care of your family members. And that's the essence of humanity. So it is what it is. I guess the book's out.
Well, I think there's something that's often forgotten about that process that family units can go through to actually really help their parents through through those later years. And then you also mentioned, of course, early on that this really also came from a series of blog posts. So I'm sure, like you mentioned, that probably was its own layer of challenge as well, combining that with your father's poetry. So clearly you put a lot of work and effort and thought into how you structured this book, which is so apparent in it. So if you had a hope as far as what readers would take away from this book, what would that be?
There we go. I don't know that. Whoop.
Okay.
Sorry about that. Technical difficulties. I'm a very practical person, so I hope that people can see, some of the tips. I mean, like legal documentation is such a huge problem if people don't have wills and they don't have power of attorney and they don't have, healthcare directives, that kind of thing. So I hope it speaks to people and says, get your ducks in a row, people. I mean, go, find out what your parents' medical care is, and self-care, find resources so you don't have to go clean their house every week or something, just really things for practical caregiving. I just think it's also, I hope, a lesson in grace and forgiveness, that, yeah, like I said, there's no perfect parent. I have 2 sons. I'm sure they'll attest I wasn't a perfect parent, but you have to have some grace. And as you get older and get perspective, you have to know that they're just people and people are flawed. And we all, hopefully, most of us do our best as parents. And that God, again, will sustain you and, he will provide. And so it's a family story. It's a faith story. I hope it can touch some hearts. And I just think if there's some families and caregivers out there that the book helps, Dancing with Louie will have done its job. It'll speak to people. And I spoke from my heart, and I hope they see that. I don't know if now is the time I can show the book.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Love to see that beautiful cover.
I know. And Morgan James does such an amazing job in designing book covers. I just love it. You can see the front and back and the
Lovely.
side.
And one of the things that I love too is, especially a caregiver who's so busy day to day, they've got so much that they're juggling.
Yeah.
It's a really it's an approachable read. Um,
Yeah.
but it also is so full of amazing content. And Nancy, I just want to thank you for spending some time today with me talking about your experiences and about your book. And I'm sure people would love to learn where they could connect with you or learn more about you or your book. So if someone is looking to connect with you, what's the best way for them to find you?
So the best way is on my website, which is just nancyrpoland.com. And there's some forms you can fill out to connect with me. You can sign up for my newsletter. Right now I'm printing one monthly called Caring for the Caregiver. And I really try to research and do some, really good information for people. I've had information for veterans, tips for people, caregivers, not just of elderly people, but kids too. So I'm really trying to just help people with that. And I also have an email address, author@nancyrpoland.com. Don't forget the R. So Nancy R. Poland. So
Amazing.
yep, I would love to hear from people. I would love to hear their feedback on the book or questions or anything like that.
Great. Well, congratulations, Nancy, on the launch of your new book. And again, thank you for spending some time today with me.
Thank you so much, Bethany. Take care.
I know.
Okay.